watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And with me today are Kam Dovedi, founder of Premier Property Group, investors and mentors. Welcome, Kam.
Good to see you, Stephen.
Good to see you too. And Ranjan Bhattacharya, founder of Succeed in Property. Hello Ranjan, welcome to you too. Long time since we've seen you on this programme.
Yes, great to be back, Stephen.
Well, good, and welcome back to you. Okay, well, we're going to get straight on with the questions. And Kam, you're first. I've been a residential buy-to-let investor who has now sold my portfolio. I'm considering investing in the commercial property sector. However, if commercial building purchases being made at this time are showing a rental return of circa 3.5%, what happens if, due to inflation, interest rate rises, and if they rise significantly from the current sub 1% level, how will these investments survive if rental income doesn't cover the borrowing? Well,
now that is a very interesting question, isn't it?
I'm very interested to hear your answer.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the person writing in for actually asking the question, because it's next level, which is pretty good. I think they've actually touched on a key point there. Many people moving forward, how are they actually going to be able to factor in interest rises, etc.? How are you going to make it a sustainable business? And one of the things in my experience that you can do is to be looking for higher yields if you're looking to keep that property. So some key numbers that you can work on. So when it comes to yields, we're looking at 7% plus, which is a very high professionalized yield, which is where is our starting point. So if you can look at property in the way that you can get into commercial, and you can, I mean, there's in my experience, you can do this, where you can get into commercial property, where you can create these yields, then you have a cushion when it comes to interest rate rises, operational costs rising, and so on, and you can still make a sustainable income and ride the wave.
Okay, I mean, I've been sort of doing a little bit of research on this question. I mean, I've just noticed a building not far from where we are here, just been sold for circa £200 million, showing a yield of, I think, 3.5%. Now, I've no doubt that's institutional investors both selling and buying at that level, but that's where a lot of our pension fund money sits and that sort of thing. Are these people going to get in trouble if we have significant rate rises though?
It's really important where you actually invest. The biggest mistake investors are making is they're actually investing in the wrong areas. You really got to find what we call the gold mine area, your specific area that will actually marry into your strategy. So if you're looking at actually investing in commercial property, really important that you define your specific postcodes where you can achieve these yields. That's the starting point. Okay.
And are you going to find that revenue is greater on the lower priced properties rather than the sort of super properties, as it were?
If we're looking at sort of one sort of fundamental level, then yes, properties which are lower prices tend to have high yields. Outside of large cities like London, you will find what you can do is, in my experience, you can actually find semi-commercial properties, for example, where you've got the commercial unit, but then you've also already got the upper flat already converted. So there's no conversion actually going on there, and you can create yields in this way. Areas like large cities like London, you might find that you're happy to do the conversion. For example, projects we've got going on, there's several projects going on, but the one in Eltham, for example, I can mention, is a single-story commercial unit, 2 single-story commercial units. One of them is a pawnbrokers, rented out to pawnbrokers. One of them is a card factory. And what we're looking to do there is to get a development gain. And once we've got the units in there, that will also increase the yield as well. So it depends on where you are, but you can make it work in both ways.
Okay. Ranjan, what do you think? Has the sort of criteria for buying and investing in commercial property changed dramatically over the last 2 years of COVID?
Not really. I think it depends who you are. And I'm reading between the lines of the question. The guy has sold his buy-to-let portfolio, residential buy-to-let portfolio. So presumably, and he's looking specifically at commercial. And a lot of people do that because they're tired of a lot of the regulatory regime and the hassle of owning residential buy-to-let. But then when they come into commercial property, it's a whole different ball game. And there are different types of investors in the commercial space looking at different types of properties. So those types of properties where they've got 3.5% yield, they're usually bought by people like pension funds who've got exceptionally low gearing, if at all, any borrowing at all. And some of those people are just looking for some, I don't know, some safe as houses commercial let that's rent to a fast food drive-through for the next 30 years, or full let and forget type lease.
Yes.
And those sort of funds are looking to achieve better than cash type returns, and 3.5% is quite good. But for a geared investor, that's not the right type of commercial property investment. And you wouldn't be looking at those sort of deals. You'd be looking at stuff that you can add value to. And the three ways of adding value to commercial property is, one is to buy an empty one that you can get tenanted, because immediately when you've got a tenant in a commercial property, it's worth more. You can buy a property that's under rented, so that the lease was signed originally 5-10 years ago, rent reviews weren't implemented, and that the current rent is less than the market rent. And simply by re-gearing that lease and getting the rent up to new levels or market levels, the property is worth more. So you get that gain. And the other way, the third way, of course, is to use the permitted development angles to convert or repurpose space to alternative uses, so you get a higher value per square foot. So this sort of investor would have to do a little bit of work to get the higher yields on commercial property. But once you've got that, it then tends to be pretty much let and forget.
And he can also be looking at significant capital gain, can't he, if he does his due diligence properly?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So sort of double whammy, if you like. Okay, great stuff. Okay, Ranjan, on with your question. Do the panel think that it's really a good idea to convert empty high street premises to residential buildings? It occurs to me that with probably no parking or other useful facilities like medical support, green spaces or schools nearby, this could turn into a social problem for the residents.
Okay, I really wonder who's written in that question, actually. There's several ways of, I think,
Ranjan, we have this question quite a lot come up. And I think it's because people are worried about losing their high street facilities, it changing to residential. And then if we go back some years, the criticism of planners were that they didn't build the infrastructure around their developments. And I think that's the angle that this person's coming from.
I think the fear is a little bit unfounded, because I think from a property developer's point of view, or an investor's point of view, you're going to look to do something that gives you the best return for that unit. Now, if you've got a high street, so you've got a Boots and a W.H. Smith and you've got a shop in the middle, to make that residential would be nuts. First of all, who would want to live in that sort of busy, high footfall, high traffic type? And it's completely the wrong type of redevelopment for that street. It's not that people are looking to put a residential property in between a W.H. Smith and a Boots on a busy high street. It's about dealing with the fact that we have an oversupply of shops nationally, particularly in secondary parades and tertiary parades, where you've just got 4 or 5 random oddball shops and no footfall, because everyone's buying stuff over the internet and that kind of stuff. So there's not that sort of demand in those sort of areas. So rather than it be empty, it's best that it has an alternative use. But what we find, because we do a lot of these conversions, is that we're making apartments which are usually 1-bedroom apartments, and they're usually in places where there is infrastructure, and the kind of people that want to live in those sort of apartments tend to be single people and couples. So the schools issue is rarely a problem. Also, transport connections are usually there, particularly in areas where there are shops. Many of the ones that we've done, their bus stops are just within 100 yards, which negates the need for that. And interestingly enough, in the development, we did one last year where we were able to provide 4 car parking spaces, and we did, but it is rented out. I don't think we have had, I think we've only had one person that ever had a car You know, we've done these developments in town centres. Another one we did about 10 years ago where we got 8 car parking spaces for 8 flats. And the problem is that people coming, visiting the town, park their car in that space.
Yes.
But none of the residents have cars, because typically now people live in these sort of locations to be free of having the cost of owning a car, because all the amenities are immediately around.
Okay, good. And just in general, how do you feel? I mean, I walk down Oxford Street, I see a lot of the big stores closed or the shops empty there. Who's going to fill these shops?
Oxford Street is a different dynamic. You know, they are now, a lot of people want to be in Oxford Street because Oxford Street is in London, and London is a world city. So when you go to a hotel around the world and you check in at reception and you see the clocks above the reception desk, there's always New York, London, Tokyo, Paris. You don't see Cardiff or Birmingham. No one cares. I'm sorry, guys, but no one cares. London is an international city.
Now, you'll get told off the same as I do for being too London-centric. I think
the consequence of that is London, international brands want to be represented in those international cities. So you're starting to see, rather than product type stores on Oxford Street, Regent Street, these brands that want to show that they have a presence in London, and they're having more showrooms as status
flagship stores.
Flagship stores,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And they're opening those up in those international cities, and London's still one of them.
Okay, great. Well, on that note, we're going to go to a break. So join me after the break when we'll hear more of your questions.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Ranjan Bhattacharya and Kam Dovedi. Welcome back, guys. Kam, has the shortage of drivers caused by immigration rule changes since Brexit really caused a shortage of building materials, leading to hold-ups in construction and renovation? What do you think?
Well, one of the shocking things, I don't know if Ranjan agrees with this, is the prices in terms of the materials have really shot through the roof. I mean, it is crazy. Bank of England right now saying inflation is 4.8%. They've just released figures. Not when it comes to building materials. They've gone up by 25 to 30% in some instances. In some steelwork, they've actually doubled. The prices have doubled, in fact. So whatever the reasons are for these, it's a fact that that's what we've got to deal with. So my view on this is, well, at the end of the day, if there's an opportunity, even though the costs are going up, and let's be honest, we don't really like that's happening. We just got to live with it. And as long as you can still make a margin at the end of it, it's still worth actually investing in. So that's my viewpoint. Although it's a little bit painful sometimes, because you look at the invoice and you think, what, really? But you just got to deal with it. And it's like I say, we're momentum investors. We call this momentum investing, which is we're treating property as a business. So costs are a part of what we're doing.
Well, I suppose as long as you can calculate it and build it in, I suppose that's damage limitation, isn't it?
Yes.
But what about contractors? Are you finding a shortage of labour?
So in my experience, what we find is contractors will be busy. They'll pipeline their projects, but there will be moments when there are gaps in their work. So if you can just find that contractor at the right time, you will find that you have a lead into that contractor, and they will work with you as well. Once they start working with you and you treat them well, you pay them on time, and you build a relationship, these contractors you can come back to.
If you're starting out, I'd probably recommend that you go for a prime contractor, because we can do these sort of projects and leverage our long-standing relationships with individual contractors and firms of electricians and the like to get stuff done. But if you're starting out and you haven't got that, I think it's very, very important to have a prime contractor. By having a prime contractor, yes, it will cost you a little bit more, but you'll probably save because you'll be leveraging their relationships with all their existing subcontractors, and you'll be basically buying into the kind of relationships that I have built up over many, many years, straight off the bat. Because the big thing now is when people are trying to do any kind of building project and they're trying to manage all the trades themselves, it is getting the trades to come in and do their bit at the time you need them to do, because they're so busy, and you will lose money through poor project management, which you'll save by actually paying a little bit more for a prime contractor to handle it.
Mm. Well, so,
we do that slightly differently. So what we tend to do is we tend to get a general contractor, and we give them the work. So there isn't a project manager as such. They actually become project manager without actually calling their project manager. That's actually what they're doing. And they'll bring in the tradesmen, they'll bring in the plumbers, they'll bring in the electricians, they'll bring in all the trades that are required. And what we find is, that's actually the person who manages the project for you, although you're not paying them a premium for being that contractor. And just the point I was mentioning earlier on, it's about to start that relationship. Also, everyone's got to start a relationship somewhere. And the way you're going to start a relationship is by knocking on the doors where people are actually doing work. So if you see a skip outside, knock on the door. Don't be afraid of that. Just go in there. Remember, contractors are always pipelining deals. They're looking for people like you. So you can knock and ask. You can make phone calls. And amongst that, you're going to get 1 or 2 people that are going to be sticking. And you don't need a lot of contractors. I mean, we have 3 full-time building contractors. And you don't need a lot. You don't need 3, right? But okay, it depends on the level you're working at. 1 contractor is good enough for you, and you only got to find 1 really good one.
One of the failures that we often hear about on this program is people's lack of ability or lack of willingness to factor in time. Now, on these difficulties that we're all experiencing at the moment, really logistics of materials, of personnel, are you finding it's affecting the time for projects to come to fruition, completion?
The honest truth is not really, no. That's not really affecting anything. In fact, all the way through COVID, we were very lucky actually as property investors, developers, because our industry was still open. I mean, you really feel for people in hospitality and retail, etc., where they didn't have a business anymore. But as property investors and developers, our business was continuing. Yes, the prices of goods have gone up, but you could still get the material. I mean, plaster was like, I don't want to say like buying drugs, but it was like on the black market. It was like buying plaster was like that. But you can still get the material. You can still do the projects.
It's about planning and project management and keeping on top of it. And why that's so important, because no one likes to report back at a weekly progress meeting and say, it's my fault. Everyone likes an excuse. So, the excuse is, the drivers, this, that, and the other, can't get this, can't get that. But when you actually drill down, it's often other things. I mean, with the plaster crisis, for example, last year, it's often the case where one tradesperson has got a trade account with one particular builder's merchant, and they are run out. But if they pick up the phone, you can get bags from other places. So you send someone in the van, go and pick them up, you get the thing done. So it is about planning, it's about project management and just keeping on top of the game to get things done. But like Cam, we didn't notice any slowdown in time. But the other thing I'd like to add about the inflation aspect, I think the building materials are going up much faster than the rate of inflation, and that's likely to continue. So I think if you're doing projects that have a long time delivery horizon, that's more risk baked in. Because if you're doing full planning permission and then putting spade in the ground and digging out foundations, by the time you get to second fixing and putting in kitchens and bathrooms, that is way down the road. And a lot of those goods are imported and subject to a lot of inflationary pressures and all of that. Which is why, in times of inflation, I really love the permitted development type of projects, where you're making multiple flats, but just converting the internal envelope of a building, because those are quick. And then in a 6 to 9 month project, you're not going to get too much inflation that you can't plan for.
Well, the higher rate of inflation, I mean, the greater the risk of the project,
yes.
really, isn't it?
Yes.
It's as simple as that. Okay, great stuff. Thank you both for that. Ranjan, with the new permitted rights rules affecting planning consents, I understand that essentially it's to assist conversion to residential property from a perhaps high street shop. However, I read complaints from a number of developers that some local authorities are refusing to implement or allow such rights. Can the panel clarify the situation? Is this not a government directive?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just go back to why permitted development exists. The planning system in the UK is unfit for purpose. It brings no certainty to developers, and that is a massive problem. We've got massive shortage of housing supply and all of that. So to circumvent that, what the central government have done, just for England, you have to blame the Welsh devolved government and Scottish devolved government for why you haven't got it there.
Right.
But just in England, we have permitted development. So there's a central government saying, if you tick these boxes, you follow these criteria, then you're pretty much good to go in terms of converting that building into flats subject to certain criteria. Now, the councils, of course, hate that, because when you apply for planning permission, you apply to the Development Control Department. They want to be on top and control everything. And it's usually computer says no, in my experience. But the permitted development doesn't give them much wriggle room. The wriggle room they have is a fight back mechanism called an Article 4. So they can apply to the central government for an Article 4 directive that allows them to be exempt from a PD right, from a particular PD right within a tightly defined area. Now, the government in the summer have really tightened up the criteria by which a local authority can apply for an Article 4. Because in the old days, before this summer, they could have a borough-wide and a local authority-wide ban on doing a particular conversion.
This is the sort of thing that happened with HMOs, for instance, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
that you can't do. It's got to be tightly defined, and you've got to identify buildings for which it applies and all of that. Now, the thing is, some London councils have, particularly London councils, it happens in the higher value areas and that kind of, where the councils are a bit lefty. I think they just don't want to see gentrification of the areas and all of this for political reasons. But that's another story. But some of these London councils they're playing a very strange PR game. They're saying they're going to apply. They're saying they've got Article 4, but they haven't got it yet, because it takes, first of all, they've got to apply to the Secretary of State, who's got to consider their application. They've got to put all the evidence up. Then, if the Secretary of State grants the council an Article 4 exemption, they've got to put everyone on 1 year's notice before it comes into effect. So in the borough of Richmond, for example, the council are promoting as though this Article 4 has already come into effect, but it hasn't. It comes into effect on August 2022. So one of my students is actually converting a shop. We're making the front keeping the front as a shop, but we're making the back into a 2-bedroom flat. 56 days to get the permitted development. It'll be done before the Article 4 comes in. So there's a phenomenal benefit for first mover advantage. There are limited places where people are getting these Article 4s, but where they are, the council are kind of saying, they're talking as though it's already in place, but it ain't. Look at the detail and you'll see that they're all coming into force at a future time.
And how would you challenge your local council on that?
It is what it is.
What's the process there for challenging that?
They don't resist it. If the Article 4 is not coming into place until August 2022, they've got no authority to reject it. There would just be an appeals procedure which they'd lose, and they'd lose their costs.
Yeah. As you say, it's a PR exercise.
Stephen, the fact is, when this came in last year, back in 2020, we outlined 11 specific permitted development rights that you could actually use. Right now, there's 4 specific ones that you can use. So in literally a year, that's how much it's been dwindled down to.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Great answers. So big thank you to Kam Dovedi and Ranjan Bhattacharya for our programme today. Great technical answers. I'm sure our viewers will be most appreciative. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.